This conference will now be recorded.
All right, great. And so, yeah, we are going to record this just so that people who are unable to watch live can log on and learn from our fabulous presenter, who is Katie Swindler. So she can wave to everybody. So before we get into the main part of our event and our presentation, just a couple of quick slides to let everyone know about other events that are going on in the community. So we have something that Sam Dietz found called the Quarantine Book Club, which I had not heard of before. It sounds very exciting. And Aaron Walter wrote a book called Designing for Emotion. This is an event tomorrow night. And again, I'm going to kind of go through these. If anyone needs to get the URL, feel free to get in touch with me. I'm happy to copy and paste this or post it on the meetup site as well. So, and the next event is the New York Service Design Collective Group, and their event is coming up on July 14th. The topic is sort of designing for equity, inclusion, and impact. Sounds like a great topic. And I know there's a great service design group here in Chicago, but it's really so nice that one of the benefits of the situation that we're in is that you can kind of join other meetups around the country and sort of see what's going on there. So this, I'm sure it's going to be a great presentation for SD in New York. To cross the country, San Francisco has a South Bay UX group. The topic of their presentation on July 14th as well is how to get traction for the design system with Shane Kibble. And he's at Rakuten. So Rakuten's doing all kinds of exciting stuff. So I'm sure his presentation is going to be pretty interesting. The UX Book Club here in Chicago has an event on July 15th, The Art of Thinking Clearly by Rolf Dobelli. This is always a great group if you are an avid reader of UX related and design related books. So I encourage folks to join the UX Book Club meetup. And finally, back across the country to the IXDA Boston. They are actually doing their first virtual event. So IXDA in quarantine, and what this is kind of a really cool event. I think what they're trying to do, and I couldn't fit it all on the screen here. They're having 7 different designers and researchers talking virtually and presenting some case studies about how to work effectively and collaborate during these times. And I think that's an important topic because it can be tough. Everyone's kind of isolated, so working a collaborative way is not as easy as it is, obviously, when we're all in office spaces. So I think that's a great event to participate in. And, again, I encourage anyone who wants some more detail to get in touch. You can always get in touch with any of us via Meetup, via Facebook, via LinkedIn. We're hoping to make our LinkedIn page a little bit more active, so hopefully there's some job postings. I know that the good thing is that there are still actually UX design jobs or UX research jobs out there. So I've gotten contacted by a number of recruiters over the past couple of weeks. I encourage them to post on the LinkedIn page, and several have. So that is a good thing. We might be one of the few industries that's really become a little bit more important as a result of what's going on. Again, you can get in touch with any of the 4 of us at any time. We're always open to suggestions. If you have a topic or a case study that you are thinking about, get in touch. We'd love to put together a webinar in the next few months with you. And finally, our event tonight with Katie, who waved earlier. If you just jumped on, Katie can wave again. And I'll let Katie sort of introduce herself to you. As we switch over, I am going to make Katie our presenter, and give it a second here.
Sure. Thanks so much, Lon. Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. I am a fellow Chicago UXer. I currently work at Allstate, typically out of the Northbrook office, though from home these days. And I've been there for about 3 years. Before that, I was at FCB Chicago. So I have a lot of marketing background. Before that, I was at a startup, an interaction startup. And before that, I did a lot of theater and marketing of theater. So I've got a theatrical background. That's actually what my undergrad was in. So yeah, I'm sure you will see that in my presentation today. So I will go ahead and cue this up. See? Can everybody see my screen? Looks like we are good to go. And all right, well, I'm just gonna go. Yeah, go ahead. Come on, you good?
Yep, all good.
Okay, great. I'm just gonna go ahead and jump right into it. There are 28 layers of protection in this spacesuit, and that is all that stands between that astronaut and kind of a gruesome death in the vacuum of space. So all 28 layers are soft and flexible. Now, back during the space race, NASA engineers considered both hard and soft suit designs. Engineers actually had a really strong preference for the hard suits because they were so much easier to build, so these really precise specifications. But tests of these suits in simulated gravity revealed how clumsy the astronauts became while wearing them. If an astronaut fell on the moon while wearing a hard suit, he might be stuck like a turtle on his back. Now, the soft suit design was being proposed by a new player in the aerospace design world, International Latex Corporation, or ILC. And to convince NASA that their designs were ready for the moon, they made a video of their own showing one of their engineers playing football in one of their suits. So this brilliant piece of propaganda, along with some pretty impressive results from the testing lab, finally convinced NASA to go with the soft, flexible suits for the Apollo mission. And what gave the engineers at ILC the edge was that they knew to get the most out of human performance, we have to build systems that accentuate our strengths and shore up our weaknesses. Now, it might be interesting to know that ILC was actually an offshoot of another much more well-known company that actually made a business out of shoring up human bodies, Latex, the women's bra manufacturer. When ILC won the NASA contract, they pulled the best seamstresses right off the Playtex bra and girdle production line to sew the Apollo suits, because these women were the ones who understood the intimate connection between the suit and the humans who would wear them. Now, very few of us design for astronauts, sadly, but we do all design for humans. And like those bra makers, having an intimate understanding of human beings is key to being able to do our jobs well. Now, there are a handful of drivers at the root of human behavior that are shared by every person on this planet. Things like the drive for to find food, a shelter, a mate. And then there's our topic today, stress. It is in some ways a great unifier. Every human experiences it. And with COVID-19 sweeping the globe, it's become kind of a constant companion. The fear and uncertainty awake our survival instincts. And yes, this stress can sometimes bring out the worst in us, but humans are resilient and community-oriented and endlessly adaptable. And stress brings those traits forward as well. So the principles we'll learn today come from life and death fields like healthcare and aviation, where the human factors of stress and design are incredibly well studied. But we will look at how we can apply these lessons to all kinds of design. Those meant for other types of high-stress users like day traders or customer service reps, designs that have features used in isolated moments of anticipated high stress, like after a car accident, and designs that for tasks that probably shouldn't be stressful, but nevertheless, your users may be coming to them in a stressed out mental state, especially in this day and age. Now, the good news is, if a stressed person can use your design, anybody can. Designing for your most stressed users should only improve the experience for all of your users. There are 4 main ways to approach designing for the human stress response, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, in some cases, you can harness it. An adrenaline rush is a powerful force of nature, and a smart design can put it to use in a critical moment. Now, in other cases, you're going to want to suppress it, either decreasing it or avoiding it altogether. If you're unable to accomplish those first 2, you may want to try to protect your users. If panic has set in, and then they can't really be trusted to protect themselves, so then it becomes our responsibility. And finally, calm. You can use design to comfort users after a stressful event and help them get back into a place where they can be their best selves again. Now, let's look at some specific examples, starting with harnessing the amazing human potential that is sometimes unlocked in the moment of a crisis, otherwise known as dad reflexes. So if you Google dad reflexes, there are hundreds of examples of dudes saving their offspring from terrible injury or certain death through purely reflexive reaction. Now, you might think that parenthood somehow unlocks some superpower within these guys, but the fact of the matter is, it was always in them. These reflexes are waiting inside each of us. So how do we as designers harness these superpowers? Well, first we have to understand, under what types of circumstances are our reflexes actually helpful? As of the 2012 Games, the Olympics no longer use starter pistols to signal the start of a game. This is in part because researchers at the University of Alberta proved that runners who were right next to the starter pistol got an unfair advantage. Their startle reflex, that bang as a starting gun, helped them get off the starting block an average of 18 milliseconds faster than runners who were further away. Now, that's not much. A millisecond is 1/1000th of a second, but in the world of high-performance sports, that actually can be the difference between silver and gold. But it's important to note, not all types of movements are increased by a startle reflex. In a study comparing the speed of movement for arms versus fingers, they showed that the speed boost shows up for the arm movement. You can see the times getting lower and lower as the startle is introduced. But in the finger study on the right, triggering the startle reflex has no benefit. The time flatlines. And in fact, there's a stiffness that gets introduced into the finger that decreases accuracy. And that makes the startle reflex is great for helping us with these gross motor movements, do things like run and punch. But it actually makes it harder for us to do things like click tiny buttons. So I was nerding out about this research with a fellow designer one day, and I was telling her all this stuff about what I found about how it actually gets harder to press small buttons when we're stressed. And she gets really still. And she says, I know exactly what you're talking about. And she starts telling me the story. So she and her kids were home. It was a nice summer day. She was cleaning while her little 4-year-old son was following her around the house. And she just left the room for a second to go grab something. And she comes back and the room is empty. The kid's not there. And she can see clearly that the screen is no longer in the window. She said, I knew immediately what happened. She runs to the window, looks down, and her son is lying still on the pavement 2 stories below. She just starts screaming his name. She runs down the stairs. She grabs the cordless phone and she runs through the kitchen to get to his side. And she gets there and he's lying so still. She can see he's still breathing, but he's completely unresponsive. And she is losing her mind. She looks down at the phone in her hand. And she knows she needs to call the ambulance, but her fingers are so stiff she can barely hold the phone. And she told me, I'll never forget this. She told me, Katie, I couldn't find the 9. She couldn't even find it. So luckily, her older son was home at the same time, and he heard her screaming, and he came to find what was going on. And she turned to him, and she held out the phone, and she said, "You have to call 911." So he did. It was her 8-year-old son who called the ambulance that day, and he saved his brother's life. Now, the kid is 14 now. He is fine, totally fine. Happy ending to that story. No lasting damage. His mother remembers it like yesterday, but it was 10 years ago. And sadly, in that decade, phones have only gotten harder to use. And think about all the screens you have to unlock and navigate through to get to your phone keypad. And today, more than 80% of the emergency calls that are made on cell phones. Now, the good news is designers have come up with a pretty decent design solution to this challenge. It's implemented on all iPhones, and it's called SOS, and it works like this.
You simply press the on-off button, the one on the right side of the phone, 5 times quickly. It's going to do 2 things: sound an alarm and call 911.
So there are admittedly some issues with this design. Most importantly, the reports are coming out that there's been a spike in false calls to the emergency services. So there's definitely some work that needs to be done. They need to continue to iterate. But setting that aside and just talking about it as a piece of design to illustrate how to design for a person in an extreme stress situation, it's actually pretty well done. So here are the things that it really gets right. First of all, it uses the largest button on the phone. And the movements that's required is something that the human body kind of already wants to do, that rapid pressing of the button. Sometimes we call it panic clicking. It's the type of movement that a tense, shaking hand is already prone to do. And then this design also provides that clear and immediate feedback. That whoop sounds like it's instantly recognizable as an emergency-related sound. And the visuals are also very clear. Of course, there's a major miss in this design. There is nothing on this phone that tells me that this is a feature or how to use it. It's also not standardized from device to device, and there has been very little public education done on how to use it. So this solution, as good as it is, could still learn a few lessons from what I think of as like the granddaddy of life and death design, the emergency stop button. Simple, iconic. It's been in use in factories around the world for 50 years. So what makes this design so successful? Well, it works with our ingrained survival instinct. Its distinctive red color stands out from other buttons around it. It's big, and its unique shape protrudes up off the panel. This is a button that's made to be slapped like you're on a game show. And it's totally taking advantage of that gross motor improvement, right? But perhaps most importantly, it's standardized and highly regulated. One of the reasons the red color has such a strong association with stop around the world is because of this button. If you have factories in your country, those factories have this button, and you quickly learn that red means stop. But of course, harnessing good instincts isn't just about making a button easy to press, right? It's also important to understand how the human mind processes information. Now, just like machines, humans have a limited capacity to process information. But unlike machines, we don't slow down or freeze up when we have a lot of information to process. We have actually a much better coping mechanism. We filter. In a neurotypical brain, at least, we just automatically prioritize the most important information and ignore the rest of it. This is what I would consider a human superpower. And the machines, they have not even gotten close to matching it yet. And so one of the worst things that a machine can do is interrupt the superpower by prioritizing non-emergency events with emergency level alarms. Now, unfortunately, a 2013 study actually found that 72 to 99% of clinical alarms that sound on medical devices are false alarms. Medical staff are constantly bombarded by meaningless alerts that cause chronic alarm fatigue. Now, alarm fatigue has been linked to many fatalities, and improving alarm design has become the focus of many patient safety groups. There's lots of smart people trying to tackle this right now. One of my favorite solutions that the designers are exploring are looking into creating these sound icons. Instead of an endless, meaningless barrage of beep, bop, boops, these sound icons use recognizable sounds from daily life and pair them with an associated alert concept. For instance, the sound of a tea kettle might tell you that your patient's temperature is getting too high. That might sound something like this. I'm going to play that again. And this one is for an abnormal heart rate. And then there's this one. I'm pretty sure that means the Death Star is attacking. Pretty sure. Studies are showing promising results for these icons, showing them to be understood faster and with more accuracy than beeping alarms. It is critical to reduce cognitive load for these professionals, and more meaningful signals can go a long way in these efforts. Now, the Army is testing out another type of alternative signal, haptic. These soldiers are wearing belts that give silent signals. Feel a buzz on your belly and you move forward. Feel it on your left, go left. Now, more specific signals can be taught to soldiers as buzzing patterns similar to like a Morse code. Tests run with soldiers on nighttime training missions have showed a lot of promise. Soldiers are able to navigate to positions faster and with less time looking at the navigation screens. This means better situational awareness, and they can keep their hands on their weapons, which for these guys is really important. The catchphrase for these haptic belts is hands-free, eyes-free, mind-free. But is it really mind-free if you have to learn all of those beep, bop, boop special codes, right? I recently spoke to a haptic designer, Keith Kirkland. Keith isn't working on the military work, but he is the co-founder of WearWorks, and he and his team are working to take haptic communication to the next level. Instead of forcing a user to learn a complicated set of rhythms and signals, Keith is trying to discover haptic signals that speak to us intuitively. Keith and his partners built a haptic device that helped Simon Wheatcroft, an ultra-marathon runner, navigate the New York City Marathon. Now, that might not seem like a huge feat, but Simon is blind, and a blind runner had never done the race unassisted before. Using haptic feedback, Simon received signals from a wrap around his chest that gave him feedback about how close he was to other runners in the race, and on his arm, he wore a wayband. That's the name of their product that helps him navigate. Now, the wayband works so that when you're facing in the correct direction, the band gives no feedback. And if you start to veer in the wrong direction, the band begins to buzz, getting stronger and more obnoxious feedback the more off track you get. Keith says the sensation is described by a lot of users as like opening a window to walk through. He told me the team originally designed it to work the other way, where you're expected to head toward the buzzing, much like the soldier vest we were looking at before. But not only did the constant buzzing get like really annoying to users over time, but it was also a huge battery drain. So having it go the other way was both the better experience and the better engineering solution. Keith and his team didn't get to the optimal design themselves. They did it by following the advice of pretty much every speaker who ever talks on the subject of designing for people with disabilities. Don't design for people with disabilities, design with them. It was their test users who were blind who told them what felt right. And it is highly intuitive for users, both with and without sight. 90% of people who put on the band need 0 instructions to know which way to go. Humans have incredible instincts honed over millions of years of evolution. If you understand those instincts and design for them, you can get so much closer to harnessing full human potential. Okay, so human survival instincts are amazing, but I do have to admit, usually when we think about designing for stress, we're thinking about ways to reduce or suppress stress. Even designers in the gaming industry who flirt with adding stressful moments into their storylines don't want to trigger a full fight or flight reaction because people tend to lose their minds and they can hurt themselves. Now, there are 3 factors you need to consider and balance when trying to suppress a startle response. The first is novelty, just how new or unexpected something is. Then there's intensity. Obviously, loudness is a big factor here, but can also be something like an intensely scary visual, which is what I'm sure this poor family is probably being shown at this moment. And then the third thing is rise time. So one of the best ways to keep from startling someone is to introduce the change more gradually. Introducing it more gradually is the best time to reduce startle. So you should be able to eliminate startle altogether through the balance of these factors. But if you are unable to affect them for whatever reason during the circumstances you're designing within, you do have one more tactic left to you, and that's training. Now, this is a specialty of our U.S. military. They have dumped billions of dollars into figuring out the most effective types of training to get the peak performance out of soldiers, even in extremely high stress situations. And these techniques can be used to develop training materials for anyone in high or low stress jobs. To create an effective training, it's important to understand the different ways people learn. Now, when you learn something in a classroom setting or a webinar like this, you're mostly learning that fact in your analytical mind. You're engaging your prefrontal cortex. I mean, look at this guy. He's using his prefrontal cortex so hard right there. This is a type of learning that is really unique to humans. We can learn how to do something simply by hearing a story about somebody doing something stupid and understand that we shouldn't do that ourselves. But the other ways that humans learn is to actually do the thing. And that's how most creatures learn new skills. And when we learn something this way, it gets logged in the prefrontal cortex, but it also gets logged in the hippocampus. And that's because these physical memories, they live in our midbrain. Experiential memories is usually what it's called. They live in our midbrain, and they stay very close to our primal core. It makes them easy to access. So when our stress spikes, oxygen is redirected from our extremities to our cores. In our bodies, you're going to get a trade-off, right? Our fingers get clumsy, but our arms get superpowered for punching. It's a trade-off. In our brains, you get a similar trade-off. The oxygen is directed away from the outer areas, like the prefrontal cortex, to our centrally located hippocampus. What this means is, in a time of crisis, the voice of our intuition gets a megaphone, while our logic and reasoning can get real hard to hear. Sometimes soldiers refer to this as the fog of war. As our stress levels rise, it can actually get hard to even access what we learned in a classroom. And that's why it's so important that they put these soldiers through training about when to shoot or not to shoot while they're on their feet with a weapon in their hand. It's how it gets logged into the right part of the brain. And anybody who's designing training that is teaching people to perform well in a stressful situation can utilize these same lessons. Obviously, hands-on training is critical. You also want lots of repetition and fast feedback. That's one of the reasons these digital simulators are so effective. They can run simulations over and over again. And finally, the more realistic the simulations are, the better. It's actually a good thing to get the heart pumping a little bit and for people to feel a little bit of stress during the training, because if they are learning something in that mental state, they'll be able to access that memory again when they get into that mental state again. State dependency. Also means that if you learn your lines drunk, you can't remember them when you're actually on stage sober. Just a pro tip there. Whenever we develop training, we have to think carefully about what we are training into people. So hopefully all of you have gone through CPR training. It is very important. It's been shown to double or even triple someone's chance for surviving a heart attack. They have CPR intervention. And if you're like me and you have done CPR training, you probably used a mannequin that looked a lot like this. This is one of the most popular mannequins on the market. So we're going to play a little game. I'm going to share a statistic with you, and we're going to see if you can figure out what this mannequin is missing based on the statistic. Okay, the statistic is 45% of men receive CPR from bystanders, but only 39% of women will receive CPR from a stranger. So what is this mannequin missing? The answer is boobs. This mannequin has no breasts. To properly administer CPR to a woman, you are supposed to rip open her shirt and place your hand directly over her left breast. The fear of being seen to do something inappropriate holds people back from taking this critical action. They are unsure. They have never trained for this situation, and it feels really wrong. Of course, that's just intuition talking, right? If we think about it logically, of course we would know that a woman would rather live than have her modesty protected. But in that moment, when she falls to the ground, I mean, it is not logic and reason at the forefront. It is intuition. It feels wrong. And so we hesitate, we freeze. So some groups have been trying to tackle this. The creative team at Joan, working with the United States of Women, has developed Womannequin. It is a low-cost wrap that can be easily added to a male CPR dummy. This gives trainees a chance to learn proper technique, get over their discomfort in the classroom, and be empowered to save more women's lives. So if you're designing training programs or material, you got to think carefully about biases that may be lurking in your training. Because biases only get stronger when we are running on instinct. And hands-on training is one of the best ways to help your users overcome those biases. It's really powerful. You can make good use of it. Okay. But what about the times we can't train our users? We can't suppress their fight or flight. We can't harness it. They are gripped by panic and they are headed towards disaster. How are we supposed to protect them in those moments? Well, one option, of course, is a full system takeover. This is where a lot of our driver safety systems are headed these days. But it's fairly rare, right, for a designer to be able to design an experience in a situation where full automation is even possible. More often, as designers, we have to predict what a user's survival instinct will compel them to do and build our safety system into these predictably irrational behaviors. Easy, right? Ugh. So we've talked a bit about brain and stress and how our stress can fog out that prefrontal cortex. So the chemical that is largely responsible for that foggy effect is cortisol. And it actually has a wide range of effects on our brain. So first, it helps us make decisions faster. That's really its primary thing, make decisions faster. But this means that we're going to give less careful consideration to those decisions. It also pushes us into black and white thinking, mostly because it helps speed up decision making, but that cuts us off from creative problem solving. It makes it harder to understand and learn new things, and even when we do learn them, it reduces retention of the things that we learn. And finally, it increases aggression, which is going to make us less open to listening to logic and reason if somebody is trying to talk us out of a bad choice. So in other words, all these things together basically means it degrades our decision-making process. So how do we protect users from making a bad decision in a moment of stress? I sat down with a designer recently who thinks a lot about this. This is Jackie Wolf. She's the one in the plaid scarf there at the front. She is a UX researcher at Michigan Medicine. A year or so, a doctor of pediatric oncology, so kids with cancer, approached Jackie's team with a problem. The researcher had done a survey of parents with children with cancer who had enrolled in a clinical trial at their center, and that survey came back with some fairly concerning results. So only 50% of the people who had taken the survey could explain the goal of the trial that their child was enrolled in. 66% were unaware they had an alternative. I don't know if they thought their kid wouldn't get treated if they didn't agree to it. And a full 1 in 5 didn't realize their child was even enrolled in the trial. So to understand how this could happen, it's important to understand the experience of these patients, these parents. When a child's diagnosed with cancer, treatment will typically begin within a few days. Those first 48 hours are a whirlwind for parents. They've often been in the hospital for days on end. They are sleep deprived, and they've just received one of the scariest diagnoses a parent can hear, that their kid has cancer. Their brains are practically soaking in cortisol at this point, right? And it's in this state they're approached by clinicians asking the parents if they would consider enrolling their kid in a clinical trial. The decision has to be made before treatment begins. So at most, they'll get 1 night to review a dense and highly technical 30-page consent disclosure agreement. And then that decision has to be made. So clinical trials like these have taken the survival rate of childhood leukemia from 35% to nearly 90% in the last 50 years. Obviously, the upside for humanity is great, but would you sign your sick child up for an experiment? And this is a difficult decision to make. And if the parents do agree to sign up, it's critical from an ethical standpoint that parents understand what it is that they are agreeing to. So, and Enter Jackie's team. They have to create a tool to give terrified, sleep-deprived parents a proper crash course in phase 3 clinical trials. Oof. What even is a phase 3 clinical trial? Phase 3 trial means that they're studying small changes to a standard treatment. There's no placebo. Every child will get a treatment. After a child is diagnosed and enrolled in a clinical trial, the kid is randomly placed in an arm of an experiment. That child will either receive the standard treatment or the standard treatment plus a slight change that the researchers are testing to see if it will improve patient outcomes. So these trials are studying very small improvements. They're looking for either a 1 or 2 percentage point improvement in survival or even just a reduction in side effects. Now, if the parents decline to take part in the trial, that is totally fine, and their child receives the standard treatment. Now, I just taught this concept to you using a chart that Jackie and her team designed. This was the original chart that was given to parents to explain the process. You can see the problem here. When faced with the challenge of teaching something that complex to these parents, Jackie wanted to make sure she got it right. So she turned out to her old friend, the library, and after hitting the stacks and reviewing dozens of studies, there were a few key insights that stood out to Jackie and her teammates. So one of the first things they were surprised to learn that there was no statistical difference between people's ability to learn via various mediums. So video, print, digital websites, all of those mediums had similar comprehension and retention rates, at least for learning about clinical trials, which is what she was researching. Now, what did help was if something was interactive. Even just turning pages or clicking on things rather than just passively watching improved that retention rate. They also found showing a mix of words and images really helped. And of course, you want to break up the content into short, bite-sized chunks. I mean, that's basic usability there. And finally, it really improved the retention if people could relate to the content through a human lens, things like conversational language and characters that they could identify with. Jackie put all these insights together and came up with what I think is actually a pretty clever solution: comics. She storyboarded out a conversation between parents and a doctor. And this solution is actually a perfect fit for all the research. It chunks out the information, it uses conversational tone, it's interactive, so users are actually clicking through each panel is how this works, and it has characters. They actually call these avatars, and they're purposefully drawn in a way that invites the readers to project themselves onto those parent avatars, project themselves into the scenario. So I wish I could tell you the official results of this improvement, but it's actually still being researched at Michigan Medicine. You are seeing some cutting edge work right here. But just obviously anecdotally and heuristically, it is getting really excellent feedback so far. So I'm really excited to see the final results. I'll try to share them with you guys once I hear back. Okay, so finally we are at calm. The moment of crisis has passed. But the chemicals that flood our bloodstream don't just disappear when the danger recedes. Cortisol and adrenaline have to be filtered out by our kidneys and liver, just like if you'd taken a drug or drink alcohol. And this can take anywhere from 20 to 60 minutes. And those chemicals continue to affect people's behavior throughout that recovery period. We've talked about these effects: poor decision-making, reduced cognition, increased aggression. Well, these days, it feels like we never have a chance for our cortisol levels to recede. Since the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak, America has faced one crisis after another. And I'll admit, there are days when I wonder how we are going to make it through it all. But we have dealt with difficult times before, and we've learned through them. In the wake of the 9/11 terrorist attack on the World Trade Centers in New York, social scientists discovered something new about human behavior. You see, based on all previous models of how they thought humans behave in a fight or flight situation like a terrorist attack, everyone should have been running directly away from ground zero. But that is not precisely what happened. Humans ran, but they didn't run away as much as they ran toward the people they cared about. Parents ran to pick up their children from school, even if that meant heading closer to ground zero. People saw others hurt and bleeding and ran forward to get them to safety. Co-workers who needed to evacuate the building took the time to gather everyone in their group, even if the building's on fire around them, before heading down the stairs together. And researchers see this behavior over and over in tornadoes and hurricanes and floods and fires. We look out for our family and our neighbors before we run away. Our instincts drive us to group up and help where we can, and only then do we flee from danger. And even now, during the COVID-19 crisis, we are gathering for regular family Zoom meetings. This is one from my family. And it is so human, right? Even when we are forced to be separated from our loved ones to keep them safe, we immediately turn around and figure out a way to get right back together, even if it's digitally. And it's important to know this isn't frivolous fun. The togetherness actually helps us process the stress. In studies of children who experienced terrible things during the Blitz in World War II, researchers found that if the children had been with their parents or family members, they had much lower rates of PTSD. And the same is true of soldiers all the way up through modern day wars. They have significantly better mental resilience when they experience trauma with their unit instead of isolated and alone. Human contact in a time of stress both calms us and makes us mentally stronger. When we create products, we have to understand how powerful this drive for human connection really is. When people reach a certain stress level, they will not leave the website or chat with a bot. They will call. And the best thing a company can do to calm them in that moment is to answer. Give them that human connection they crave. Now, I understand companies' resources aren't infinite, so that means carefully prioritizing that human-to-human support. To get the most bang for your customer service buck, think about your customer journey and find the moments that meet these two criteria. You want to look for times where somebody is doing something that is both high stakes, something where a mistake will probably cost a lot of money or someone gets hurt, and also is low confidence activity, something they don't do very often, where there's a lot of uncertainty if they're doing it right. You're looking for some experiences that have both of those elements. Now, at my job at Allstate, the primary example is filing an insurance claim, right? The customer just had an accident. They're feeling particularly stressed. They've likely never filed a claim before, and they're worried about losing their payout if they mess it up. They want that human connection in that moment. And so we prioritize it. And that human connection isn't the only way to calm users. The visual design of an interface can impact users in both large and small ways. It can start something as simple as just rounding the corners in our designs. So look at the aesthetics of objects. Put participants in an MRI machine and ask them to look at two objects with the same meaning or function. Looking at objects with sharp, spiky edges actually lit up the parts of their brain that signal potential danger, whereas the curved objects did not. And not surprisingly, when asked which version of the object they like better, participants had a very consistent preference for the curved object. It was just kind of wired to like it better. In our 2018 TED Talk, designer Ingrid Patel-Lee takes this a step further, exploring what she calls the aesthetics of joy. I love this part of the presentation. She's identified visual patterns that consistently trigger a feeling of joy in the viewer. Properties like round things, bright pops of color, symmetrical shapes, a sense of abundance and multiplicity, and a feeling of lightness or elevation. Now, helping users feel less stressed or even joyful may be a noble pursuit, but does it actually change behavior? Can it affect that bottom line? Well, this is a picture from Tirana, the capital of Albania. In 2004, former artist Edi Rama was elected mayor. And when he entered office, this city was dingy, crime-ridden, and resource-starved after years under communist rule. Rama used one of the cheapest methods possible to restore his city, paint. He designed the first building himself, but the trend quickly spread, and lo and behold, a strange power came with these bold restorations. People stopped littering. Citizens began paying taxes, and violent crime went down without adding any additional police force, all from a bit of brightly colored paint. A joyful aesthetic may seem like a bit of fluff, but it can have a surprising impact on human behavior. As designers, we may not be on the front page or the front lines. We aren't the heroes fighting the wars, or the doctors riding the wave of a pandemic, or the astronauts venturing outside the safety of our little blue marble. But if we craft our experiences carefully and mindfully, we can be there for people in the moments they need us most. We can protect them, we can calm them, and we can harness the potential inside of them, helping them to do truly amazing things. Thank you.
Awesome. That was a terrific presentation. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I feel like I've learned all kinds of exciting new things that that I didn't know before. So yeah, I'd love to open it up to everyone.
Yeah.
To present some questions. So because I think it's covered a whole bunch of different things from haptic to colors. I just got in a debate with a client the other day about round buttons versus square buttons. So you're helping me make my case.
You're welcome. Science.
So let's take a look at our chat and see if we have any questions.
While you're digging in there, I just want to take one moment to just ask everybody, let them know that I am actually looking for designers to interview who are working on high stake, high stress experiences. I actually recently signed a contract with Rosenfeld Media to write Life and Death Design, the book. So I am currently on chapter 4, I think, and I've got 4 of 10. I've got a lot of writing left to do, and if you work in any high stress, high stakes fields, or you know somebody who does, that you can send them my way, or you know studies that you think are in line with this stuff that you think I would be interested in, I would love to connect with you. I'm drinking from the fire hose. I'm taking it all in. So please feel free to reach out to me. I'd really love to hear from you guys. Also, if you want to download these slides, you can go to my website at lifeanddeathdesign.com. There you can download the slides, you can sign up for book notices, you can contact me, whatever you need. I'd love to connect with people, LinkedIn, through email, whatever works for you. Love to connect.
Excellent. And also, I will put the video of this presentation on the IXDA YouTube channel, which is brand new as of our last event. So I think we have a question from Gabrielle. And Gabrielle, if you want to actually turn your mic back on and share your video.
Yeah,
to ask the question. Yeah, that might be a fun idea.
Yeah, please. She's like, I wasn't expecting video, no.
Well, I can read her question. It's basically, does the body produce different stress responses depending upon the source of the stress? And, and her example was like maybe a cancer diagnosis versus a war setting. So that's an interesting question in terms of the type of stress that a person may be going through at the time.
Yeah. The cortisol and the adrenaline are pretty basic chemicals that are used in the majority of stress responses. And stress is surprisingly basic. I'm sure that they have, slightly different mixes on them, but they are involved in most types of stress response, both chronic, generalized anxiety and acute stress responses, which is, a stress response to a particular moment. The cortisol is more that brain chemical and is going to be affecting your, mental responses, and then the adrenaline is in kind. So there's a little bit of a difference when you're startled by something. There's a moment where you react, like let's say something's flying at your face. Your peripheral vision is especially responsive to triggering a startle response. Let's say something's flying at you from the side and you jerk your head. there is a moment where you've had a startle response and, some chemical reactions have started, but it's the HPA axis, which I think is, now I'm not even going to try to remember all the technical words behind HPA axis, but it's the process by which it says, hey, is this a life-threatening emergency where we need to go into full fight or flight? Or is this just something that, we move first and then we ask questions later, right? in sort of the body moment. So there is some chemicals that are in that sort of pre-process of just the reflexive startle before you go into that full adrenaline release and into that full fight or flight mode. So there's a little bit of difference there. But when it comes to stress hormones, they are pretty similar from the research that I've done. I don't claim to be a doctor or a neuroscientist, but from what I've read, they tend to be pretty standard across the board.
Okay, great. Anyone else with a question that they would like to present to Katie?
Hey, Lon, this is Sam. I'll ask one.
Sam?
Sure.
I'll go old school, face to face. So, is there a threshold or a way by which you measure sort of the fight or flight reaction instinct versus sort of a deeper sustained stress, like financial concerns or worries? Because those kinds of stresses can back up, obviously, and have an effect. But I'm not sure what that threshold is, or if there's a distinction to be made there.
One of the ways that I think about it, so I think about the human stress response in 5 phases. So there's that initial startle reflex. Then there is what I call the intuitive assessment, and that's sort of like hippocampus activation, right? That it's more using your experiential memory and saying, is this dangerous or isn't it? Then there's your fight or flight response. Then there's your reasoned response, which is engaging that prefrontal cortex, and then there's recovery. So in that fight or flight response, I sort of think of that as the moment where your body is reacting before your prefrontal cortex really is kicking in and having a lot of say in what you're doing. And I mean, your intuition's working all the time, not just in a fight or flight reaction. In fact, it's making, I think, something like between 70 and 90% of your decisions at any given time are intuition-based. But Daniel Kahneman has this idea of system 1 and system 2, right? Where system 1 is what's running you. It's your intuition. It's kind of running the show about 70% of the time. And then you've got system 2, which is kind of this overlord, and it's watching everything that you're doing. And it interrupts when it needs to say, hey, no, you actually should do something different. So it kind of monitors. This system is very resource lean. You don't burn a lot of calories, and this is where you do all your hard thinking, right? We burn our brain calories. And so I oftentimes think of the fight or flight reaction is a time in which you're really running on that system 1, and that system 2 hasn't really engaged yet to sort of divert it. But, when it comes to generalized stress, generalized stress response versus acute stress response, in most of the literature that I read, it tends to be more about the length of time that it is being engaged over, that generalized anxiety. And when you have generalized anxiety, you are more prone to spiking up into those acute stress response moments, right?
You're easier to trigger in those states.
That's exactly right. So they're very similar. Like I said, they're both involving the same adrenal system, but it's not, there's not like a timeline. It's like, oh, well, when these criteria are met, it's fight or flight, and when these criteria are met, it's generalized anxiety, because they're kind of mixed together, and it's mostly how long it's lasting.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, great question, Sam. Any other questions from our group? Yeah, I mean, I sort of have a question in terms of, from an Allstate perspective, what are some of the sort of end products that your efforts are having an impact on? Is it just sort of the customer perspective? Have you done any research internally for the people who are sort of taking incoming calls as there's emergencies? Maybe tell me a little bit and tell the group a little bit about that.
Yeah. I have mostly been borrowing from the expertise of my peers as opposed to teaching them at this point. I haven't read the book yet. But they have been definitely, I talked to, so the UX team at Allstate, we create products, digital products, both for the consumer market and for our agents and for our customer service reps. And those are the agents and the customer service reps are two distinct groups, right? The agents are small business owners and the customer service reps are kind of employed by Allstate. But we have online digital tools that are used by both of those audiences. And we have done quite a bit of research. I talked to my peers around the types of training that the customer service people receive. Customer service is not an easy job, and that is a very difficult job. I've read a lot of research around, increased suicide rates and all of this stuff, because when people are aggressive towards you, that it's really hard for humans to take, and people can get really, they dehumanize. The customer service reps can get dehumanized because they're representative of a company that is not a human, and so then they start to take on those traits in our minds, and it's really easy to forget that we're talking to a person because they are representing they're representing a company. So the other place that we really think about it a lot is actually roadside, because that is one of the times. I'm sorry, that was in speak. Roadside service. So when you have when your car breaks down on the side of the road, Allstate provides roadside service, like a tow truck or somebody to bring you gas. And we have an app specifically for Allstate Roadside Motor Club is what we call it, and where you can order a tow truck or whatever you need. And so we do know that that is a use case where we're pretty darn sure that people are going to be in a stress state of mind while they are using it. And so we think a lot about the simplification, the leading them. We try not to present too many choices at one time, because decision making is difficult in this moment. So it's definitely something that we think a lot about, that stress state and how it affects decision making and cognition, like what people can even understand in those moments. We use even more. We always try to use simplified language, but we use even more simplified language in those cases where it's high stress. And we've recently gone to a visual aesthetic that has all of these really rounded illustrations. It's very round. Like all of our buttons are very round now. We really play into that. Our logo is that like beacon with the hands, in like an oval. Mm-hmm. And we use that oval shape a lot because it's got that rounded aesthetic and it's very friendly. So we think about all of that as we craft these experiences for the high touch, high stress moments. We also have things like, I mentioned claims is a time when people are very stressed and they really want that human connection. Now, that's not to say that people are always stressed about claims. We have a product called Quick Photo Claim, where you can have a claim that's very quickly done. You can get a response, in sometimes hours instead of days or weeks. But that is for low cost. We have like a threshold on how big of a claim it is. That's for only really minor claims. And part of that is, risk on our end, but the other part of that is that people are much more inclined to use that quick photo claim when the risk isn't as high, right? We talked about high stakes and low confidence, right? And so they may have the lower confidence, but the system really walks them through it. And the stakes we only really use it when it's the slightly lower stakes. We're talking about hundreds of dollars of damage, not thousands of dollars. So those are some of the ways that we think about the impact of stress and the sorts of stuff that I talked about in this already at Allstate.
Okay, great. All right, I'm not seeing anyone pop in with additional questions, but I do want to open it up just for a minute. If there are folks on the webinar whose firms are hiring, feel free to chime in and let us know who you are and what role you're hiring for. So I'll give that just a minute for anyone who is hiring. And it may not be anybody at this point, but hopefully that will change in the coming months. All right, yeah, I don't see anyone chiming in. So I think this was a fantastic presentation. Really interesting, all the different touch points that you hit on, and how the design of something impacts everything from people who are becoming astronauts to people who are visually impaired, to folks in the military. It really is it's such a huge and developing field. So this was terrific.
Yeah, literally everybody.
Exactly. But this was terrific. So Katie, thank you so much for sharing your experience and your thoughts with everybody tonight. We really appreciate it very much. And keep us in the loop as your book is completed. We will promote it to the group and share any additional thoughts or ideas that you have in upcoming events.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Lon. I really appreciate the time.
All right, and again, thanks everyone for joining tonight. We really appreciate your participation.
Bye.
Thanks, Katie.
Take care,
Bye.
guys.